Welcome to Your Future Starts Now, the go-to podcast for extraordinary women who are ready to step into their next chapter with authentic confidence. I'm your host, Gia and Andrea, empowerment coach, motivational speaker, children's book author, and girl mom. Whether you're a corporate powerhouse or an entrepreneur, this show is designed for you. Your Future Starts Now is more than just a podcast. It's a movement towards rewriting the rules of success for high-achieving women. Are you ready to get unstuck and step into your next chapter? If so, you're exactly where you need to be. Your future starts now. Welcome to Your Future Starts Now. I'm your host, Gia and Andrea. Thanks for tuning in. I'm so excited to introduce you to Dr. Andrea Lein. Dr. Andrea is the leading authority at the intersection of mental health, positive psychology, and giftedness. She has devoted her entire career, spanning over 25 years, to studying and helping exceptional individuals embrace their superpowers, nurture their psychological well-being, and live a life of fulfillment and significance. With decades of clinical and leadership experience, Dr. Andrea uses her gifts to serve and guide some of the most respected, brilliant, and creative minds in the world. Dr. Andrea, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited.
It's such an interesting background, your experience. Tell us, how did you first become interested in the field of mental health and specifically working with gifted individuals?
It is unusual. It's so unusual that when I proposed this idea in my early, very beginning of grad school, I had some professors sort of scoff at the idea because it was over 20 years ago, and I had to actually create a program for myself. So I ended up getting my master's degree in educational psychology, specializing in the gifted. And then I did my doctorate in clinical and school psychology because at the time, all the research and work on gifted, and really we were thinking of gifted students, like younger, kid ages, was focused on the cognitive and the intellectual piece. And at the time, I was like, well, that's all very important, but I'm really interested in the social emotional development, the psychological issues. And there were no textbooks on it. There were no graduate programs on it. So I did have one wonderful professor who encouraged me. And then I had other professors who sort of looked at me like, this is an odd, niche area. But now it's so interesting, 20 plus years later, there are many more people who focus on this niche, still limited, but many more. There are programs out there. There are books being written. So it's exciting. And that was one of the first moments I had to really trust my gut and what I really wanted and what I believed in, and not listen to the very intelligent, credentialed, degreed professors who sort of looked at me with their head tilted. Like, what are you doing?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I want to take a moment to just recognize what you just said. It's so important, especially at such a young age. I feel like when we're in our 20s, we don't know which way is up, right? But you had that intuition and you listened to it and you followed it despite what other people might have been telling you. So I imagine the support from that one professor who kind of leaned in must have been really critical for you, right?
Yes. And a funny little story about that was she was my fourth grade teacher who I somehow, our paths crossed again when I was at the University of Virginia. And I went to a school for the gifted, like a separate, different school. And she taught in that school, fourth grade. So she came back into my life in my early mid-20s. And that's the path I took. So thank goodness for our fourth grade teachers.
Absolutely.
You never know.
I love that. You really never know. And such an impact that they have on us. That's incredible. Yes. So tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to where you are in the work that you do today.
Yeah. Well, first of all, just for context for your listeners, I'm a wife. I am a mom. I have a gifted, twice exceptional, and we can talk a little bit about what that means later. Sure. Daughter, who's very similar to how I was growing up. So I felt like I was well equipped to parent her. And really, I think my journey started with a difficult childhood that I was trying to make sense of. Like I think many people who go into a field of therapy or psychology, it's, we're trying to sort things out for ourselves. But I also had this deep, deep desire from a young age. I knew as a teenager, I was looking at some of my peers and my classmates who were brilliant people, brilliant, creative, intelligent. And some of them literally were like about to drop out of school. And I remember thinking back then, and I was pretty demotivated in school at that point, just because I thought this isn't really challenging. Even though I went to one of the top public schools in the state at the time. And I just thought that if this is it, I mean, we're going to lose a lot of talent because people are not challenged. They're not, their bright minds aren't just being sparked. And so that was the desire for me, both from the school piece, but also that social emotional piece, recognizing that a lot of my friends, as smart and as intelligent as they were and are, there were other things going on in their life, like trauma, difficult family situations, divorce. And I was seeing through this lens, even as a teenager, thinking, I want to help this population. And that's literally what I have done my entire career. And it's been such a gift to see that unfold and to get to the point where I could really have all the tools and the education that I needed to do what my little teenage heart wanted to do. So I've had the joy of, over the years, primarily up until the last few years, working with gifted, bright adolescents and young adults, and they're very gifted, successful parents from all over the world who really needed more support from that emotional, from the psychological standpoint.
Sure.
So it's been a very fun journey.
That's so interesting. So fascinating.
Yes.
And then you mentioned your daughter is twice exceptional. Do you want to just touch upon that for a moment?
Yeah. And so I'll just, as a sort of brief explanation, and I usually don't even like to use the word gifted because it comes with a lot of stuff that we carry with that, but just as a catch-all term. So twice exceptional really is someone who's deemed gifted, and we can talk about how we define and how we actually sort that out, but who are gifted, but also have some other, we'll call it a diagnosis, whether it's ADHD, dyslexia, it could be anxiety, OCD, like there's a lot of other things that could fall into, but it just means they're really bright. They have all these gifts and talents, and they have something else going on. And sometimes, what I often teach is, when you have a twice exceptional individual, you'll either mask the gifts, because especially in school, they focus on what's the problem here. If you have a reading disability or a math issue, or processing speed, they sort of focus on that. So you can sort of forget about the gifts, or they don't get identified accurately, or they don't get the services they need, or vice versa. They could be really gifted and so bright that other issue gets masked for a very, very long time. And I think even today, it's fascinating to me how many adult women, gifted, bright women, it's like an explosion because of TikTok or something. And everyone's like, oh, I think I have ADHD or, I have undiagnosed fill in the blank. That is basically, if it resonates with you, whether you were identified as a child or not, but you're thinking, I think I am probably one of those gifted souls in the world, and you have something else going on, then you qualify for being twice exceptional. And I am one of those people as well. So,
So interesting. I have seen that explosion of specifically adult women being diagnosed with ADHD. I'm curious, what are your thoughts around that in terms of, why we're seeing those increased rates?
I think there's probably a lot of reasons, but I think with increased access to information, and if it's through social media, even if it's even just the internet, right? When the internet exploded, we had at our fingertips, we could Google things. But I think information gets passed very quickly and in a way that's really accessible to people. And they read a little snapshot. And I'm not saying that they don't have undiagnosed ADHD, because it has been historically very underdiagnosed in girls. Because they don't present the same way like a young boy with ADHD would present. So I don't think it's totally untrue, but I think with all things, it's like the medical student syndrome where all the first year students think they have every diagnosis in the book because you just it's just a natural human thing. So I
Sure.
always encourage people, get a full assessment before you jump to any conclusions, especially before you
Absolutely.
take anything for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm curious, from your experience, what are some of the most common messages that we as parents, as teachers, as mentors, what are some of the messages that we maybe inadvertently are giving to our children and the next
hmm
generation?
Yeah. Well, in my work with families, and now just to clarify, many years ago, so I'm trained in a traditional clinical psychology background, but very early on in my career, at the same time I was deciding to do gifted, I guess I was sort of a little bit rebellious because the field of positive psychology was birthed like literally as I was beginning graduate school.
Hmm.
And I remember reading the first article by Martin Seligman, who's sort of known as, kind of the father or the grandfather of that field. It's relatively new. And I read the article that he wrote in the APA, the American Psychological Association. He sort of cast this vision, and I thought, that is what I'm all about. And I was in a clinical psychology program, which is very focused on
Hmm.
diagnosis and intervention. And I'm glad I had all that training, but really, even throughout my training, through my clinical internship, and through all my clinical work, I was always integrating positive psychology. It's sort of just like, it feels like it resonates with me. And so for your listeners, positive psychology really is like the other spectrum of what psychology has sort of historically focused on researching the negative. Positive psychology focus on like what are the positives of human psychology, and let's research and study those things so that we have this more comprehensive view of what makes life worth living and what are
Hmm.
the factors that play into that. So I come to my work now as a coach with sort of more that's at the forefront. So having said that, working with families over the years, one of the things, especially the families that I worked with, who were, the parents were and are sort of like leaders in their fields, oftentimes like top um, in their profession, and highly successful. And so I think the challenge for successful, high achieving people, and the cultures in which and the families in which we raise our children, is how do we encourage and nurture our children's gifts and talents without it becoming sort of the sole focus and priority.
Hmm.
And even if families do a pretty good job with that, what about the school system? What about the community, the neighborhoods? And with my dissertation, a lot of the research I was looking at was actually focused on affluent families. And it's fascinating because the researchers stumbled upon this truth, which is that they were actually studying disadvantaged kids, but found that the kids from the most affluent homes and communities had skyrocketing, incidents of depression, anxiety, substance use. I mean, much more than the kids in the middle. So you had kids on either end of this extreme, and
Hmm.
so they started looking at why might that be true.
Yeah.
And so I think some of those messages are, your worth is tied to what you do, right? That's like a typical one. We as
Sure.
adults, we as high achieving women are still, probably many of us, I can raise my hand to that, like unraveling that and separating out our value from what we do. And I think it's a tricky thing for parents because we want them to do well, and yet we need to be really careful, not just what we say to them, but what we model in our own life. I think that's, at the end of the day, that's what I would say to every high achieving woman who's a mom out there. Or even if you're not a mom, maybe you're an auntie or you're, a mentor or something. It's being very careful with the messages we're sending through just how we live our life.
Yeah.
Because that's what gets, that's what they receive more than what we say.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's such a
Yeah.
powerful point. And I want to recognize that, we can all reflect on those experiences in our family of origin, right? Not
Mhm.
only what we were explicitly told, but
Right.
what were the lessons that we were indirectly taught.
Yes.
right? About who was doing the dishes, who was doing the laundry, who was preparing dinner, right? So
Yep.
I am a firm believer. For clarification, I'm not a parenting coach, but I am a firm believer in role modeling the behaviors that you want to see. I have two girls, and so
Yeah.
I think it is important. Sometimes I do have to take a step back and realize that when I'm setting a boundary or creating time for myself, it might be difficult, but I'm teaching them how to do that,
Yes.
right,
Yeah,
for themselves. And
exactly.
so I think it's really important to keep that in
Mhm.
mind. And I love what you said also about the self-worth piece is so true because we're so tied up and wrapped in our identity, right? For me in the
Mhm.
corporate world for 20 years, that was my identity, right? I
Mhm.
almost like didn't know who I was outside of that. I was a
Yes.
mom and I was a businesswoman, right? And
Yes.
outside of that, I couldn't tell you. And I
Right.
think we all get stuck in that trap of being defined by our roles as opposed to
Mhm.
sitting in our self-worth and knowing who we truly are at our core.
Yes, and I would 100% I agree with that, and it's been my journey as well. And
Mhm.
and my daughter, so I part of the interesting part of my journey as a high achieving, driven woman was that I very unexpectedly got pregnant when I was 19.
Wow.
And when I found out I was having a daughter, um, at first I thought, oh my goodness, because I really had dreams of getting my PhD. And I was the first person in my family to even go to college and graduate from college. So neither of my parents, my father immigrated from the Philippines. My mother was from the small little farm town in Wisconsin. They had 4 children and they gave the best that they could to us, but neither one of them had college education.
Mhm.
So I didn't even know if I could get a PhD, but I thought I was surrounded by people in school. That was one of the benefits of the school that I went to, where
Sure.
it was sort of normalized. Like, not that everyone had a PhD, but that you could get one. And so when I got pregnant and I decided, okay, I'm going to raise this child, and I consciously knew I was not going to be getting married. I was going to do this as a single parent.
Mhm.
I thought, how will I do this? Do I have to give up on my dream? But I immediately knew there's no way I'm giving up on my dream. And if anything, because I'm going to have this little girl, I do not want her to grow up with a mother who just threw her dreams in the trash and tried to piece together whatever little job she could because that's what she felt she had to do. And so I just didn't take that path, and I was like, I'm not going to be a statistic. I am not doing that. And so on the one hand, she gave me I was already very driven, but she gave me that extra push,
Mhm.
like, I'm going to show
Sure.
the world. I'm going to break all the stereotypes. I never met another person in grad school who was also a single parent, but it was definitely a lonely path.
Sure.
So that being said, I wanted her to learn the lesson of you follow your dreams, you go after your dreams no matter what. On the other hand, fast forward, in my mid to late 30s, I started having a lot of health issues that partially my mother and my grandmother also were dealing with. It was like fibroids and endometriosis and female issues
Mhm.
like that. But on top of that were other things going on that I was going to doctor after doctor, and they're like, do you have a stressful job? Like, so many doctors asked me that, and I would laugh because I had an extremely stressful job. Every day was a stressful day. And so I struggled through that for quite some time before I finally got the clarity and the courage, really more the courage. I think I had the clarity before the courage to leave what I was doing because I loved it so much. But that was that other lesson that by that point, my daughter was a teenager. And I remember thinking, it's important for her to know to follow your dreams, but you cannot sacrifice you can't sacrifice yourself on the altar of of those dreams. Like, you have to
Sure.
figure out another way. And so I was presented with an opportunity really over the last I don't know, 5-6 years to figure out that other way. How do I continue to dream in my life? And I have new dreams, right? How do I do that at this stage and now show my daughter you have total permission to get really creative and take care of yourself in a way that I hadn't learned to do very well. Because I was so focused. And I think a lot of high achieving women are constantly, I think we're doing better. I think even the discussion around it is a discussion we were not having 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's great. But I hope that for our daughters growing up there, this will become more the norm of their path going forward. I mean, I think the younger generation is already making that very clear that they're not going to be down for all the craziness that I've done in my life.
That we took on, right?
It's good.
Yeah, they know there's a better way. It's so true. It's a great point. Such an inspiring story. I love, love hearing about your journey. I'm curious, when you think about other, the women listening to this podcast, mothers or mothers to be, what can we do to cultivate more psychological health and incorporate positive psychology, right, in our families?
Well, I think that my big mission, even though I focus on working with adults now, part of that reason is because I know that when, especially the moms, but dads too, but I work with a lot of moms, really successful, beautiful, wonderful, amazing women, and our intentions are so good. I remember in grad school, again, my advisor said at the first year of feedback, like, the only thing we're concerned about is you feeling like you need to be a superwoman. And I remember leaving that meeting and thinking, well, I don't know what else I'm supposed to do, because I want to be the best mom.
Yeah.
And I want to be the best in what I'm learning, right? So where do I drop a ball? I mean, back then I just thought, I don't know how to do less than trying to go for the best. But I think when it comes to high achieving women who happen to be moms, or maybe moms to be, focusing on our psychological well-being. And even if you don't have the piece about positive psychology is I'm hoping to teach people, wherever you're at, whether you're struggling with depression or whether you're just kind of in the middle and you don't have like a diagnosis per se, but you just know it could be better. Life is a little gray, and you want it to be vibrant, and you want to feel joy, and you want to be your fullest self. When our kids see us living that out, and when we embody that and we're doing it, they get a tremendous amount, because the atmosphere we're creating influences them. And I think a lot of my work in family systems was really helping the parents shift just how they were living their life, separate from parenting, totally separate from parenting. Because when you shift from the inside out, you are emanating. When you have joy, you are emanating joy. When you have peace, you emanate peace, right? When you have hope, you can give away hope. When we don't really have those things, we can't give them away. And who do we want to give those things to? We want to give those things to our children. So when we have stress and we're holding on to stress, we're creating an atmosphere of stress. When we have anxiety, we're creating an atmosphere of anxiety, and it's contagious. It's literally contagious. So that is how we transfer these, moods of depression or anxiety, or even just like like lifelessness gets transferred from generation to generation. And I'm so passionate about not only we as women having really abundant, beautiful psychological well-being, but it's because I want the next generation who are going to take over things in the next little while. We're going to blink our eyes and they're all going to be in charge. And I want them to be full of joy and full of peace and full of hope and optimism, because we have so many issues in our world, and they're going to be the leaders to solve the problems. So we have to lead. And the way I think of it is, we have to build the psychological wealth, whether that means maybe it's working with a therapist, maybe it's talking with a friend, maybe it's working with a coach. I mean, there's so many different ways to go about that. There's not one path, but it's just developing. It's like you fill your cup, you fill it so full, you're so full, it just overflows. you're just overflowing. And then your
Mhm.
family, your community gets that beautiful overflow.
That's
That's to me
amazing.
what positive psychology is really well positioned to help people with. And that's why I love teaching it. It's fun.
It's incredible to think about because we often, I think, compartmentalize or put pieces of our lives in silos, right? And so
Mm.
I think it's really important awareness that parenting is not just what you do in terms of guiding your children, it's who you are holistically.
It's who you are.
It's
It's
how you
who
show
you
up.
are.
It's
Right.
what you
Right.
represent, what you stand for. And
Right.
so when you are, coming back from a bad meeting or, having a bad morning, how you show up matters,
Yes.
right?
Yes. And learning how to shift. I mean, if you think about your own upbringing with your parents, you probably both, whether it's a positive or negative, can think of ways that you might not remember the specifics of how they parented, or you might, but you remember who your parent, how they were,
Yeah.
right? Like what was the atmosphere they created in the home?
Yes.
That's the thing that sticks with you, that literally sticks with you on a cellular level when you don't even remember specifics. Your cells remember. That's why it's so hard sometimes to deprogram. But I
Yeah.
want to be, and I just want to be the first one to admit, I was not a perfect parent. I say this to every parent I work with because, and I have such empathy, such deep empathy for parents because it's hard. It's like the hardest thing you've ever done, right? And but I always say it's never too late to learn. It's never too
Mhm.
late to change.
Sure.
And my daughter and I, like, we can talk back. I mean, I was the mom that totally came home stressed and like had a stress ball around her all the time. I mean, and I even knew tools. So
Right.
I was a
Right.
psychologist, but it doesn't matter. Like
No.
you can know all the things, but you have to like really start applying them.
Sure.
So when I was able to do that, things, start to shift. And it's great. So I always just encourage people, just start where you are. Start where you are. And even start. I had a conversation with my sister just this week. She has 4 kids. She runs a business. She's amazing in so many ways. And it's a winter, it's long winter. She just launched a new business. She's been going full speed ahead for like a few months. And I just encouraged her, just like do one small little thing different today. And she had a walk with a friend scheduled. And she called me up later and she was like, "Yeah, it's amazing." She's like, "I don't
Mhm.
have to change my entire life right now. I just had to do one small thing." She went for a walk in the sunshine, had a good talk with a friend, and it was enough to start shifting her to start thinking about the other parts of her life, you know, that she wants to shift right now. It's just one little baby step, one little baby step. So whatever that looks like today, I say, joy is not a luxury. Connection is not a luxury. It cannot be
Mhm.
seen that way.
Yeah.
You have to find those moments of joy and connection like as consistently as you can to fill your cup
Yeah,
so you can
such
keep pouring
powerful
out.
advice. Yeah,
Mhm.
taking a small step, right, to
Yeah.
shift from feeling stuck to feeling empowered. And
Mhm.
even if it isn't something you stick with, trying different things, right, and
Right.
experimenting
Right.
and seeing what works for you and what doesn't. I
Yes.
also love this
Everyone's different.
concept that you talked about of, of course, there's genetic and there's a biological component to mental health, but to your point, there's so much more. There's the behavioral aspect, the cultural aspect, and the families that we create and how
Yes.
how we were raised, and then it also informs how we want to raise our own kids, right, both the
Yeah.
positive and the negative.
Yeah. And I think the empowering piece about this that we know so much more now with the research is that I don't mean to diminish the role of genetics, but it actually, we have way more opportunity for change and the neuroplasticity of our brain based on environmental conditions. We didn't fully understand that before. And so the idea that we are sort of stuck with a certain path from a mental health perspective. When I was a teenager, I really did struggle with that. I had there was a lot of mental illness in my family line.
Hmm.
And I was struggling. I was depressed. I was anxious. I was suicidal. And I
Hmm.
just thought, oh, it's genetic. So therefore, I guess this is my lot in life. I was such a negative person. I like to tease. If you knew me as a teenager, you would say, I would be voted least likely to become a positive psychologist, like
Oh
least
my
likely.
gosh.
Like I was wearing all black and I was so jaded and cynical and not a happy person at all.
Wow.
So, and I've done, I mean, and I want to say this I say this not to boast or even diminish the role of medications. I say this for any woman who is even struggling with that thought of like, is this the way it's just going to be?
Mhm.
I have transformed truly the inside, the core of myself through other methods and never using medication. And again, I'm not saying there's a place and time for
Sure.
that. And so I'm not against it, but I think in our society, we believe that that is sometimes like the only thing we need, or it's like a quick fix. It's just not going to fix the deeper thing.
Yeah.
So it is possible to go from like where I was like very, very deep in the negative to now I'm like that kind of annoying, very optimistic. The glass is always half full. I was annoying in a different way before, and now I'm annoying in the positive way. But it's fine. I'll take it because I would rather be I would rather be an optimist. But honestly, when I was younger, I never would have thought this is who I would become.
Oh my gosh.
Truly.
So fascinating. And I never would have guessed, right? In a million years. What
Yeah.
a transformation. That's
Yeah.
incredible. Dr. Andrea, tell us about we talk a lot about success and redefining success in this podcast. Tell us a little bit about how you define success for yourself and how that definition has evolved for you over time.
Yes, such a good question. I feel very grateful that through this chronic health journey I've been on, probably for the last, I don't know, almost a decade, I have been forced in a wonderful way by the universe to redefine my idea of success. And so I'm grateful for that. And for me now, I really feel success when I know I'm living wholeheartedly, when I'm living my life fully and I'm walking in the calling that I'm uniquely meant to do. Like that is it. And as long as I can stay true to my highest self and I just walk in that, I'm good. I'm good.
Yeah. So
which
powerful.
is very different than I think how I would have defined it before.
Yeah. Then I think how we were raised to believe and how we start living our lives and then being able to step back and figure out what that means for us individually.
Yes.
So powerful.
Yes.
Dr. Andrea, thanks so much for being here, for sharing your insights, your expertise, and your personal story. So inspiring. How can our listeners learn more about you and where can they connect with you?
Yeah, well, they can find me on my website. It's just my name, Andrea Lein. That's LEIN.com. And they can find me on LinkedIn. They can find me on Instagram. I do have a little link there too. If you want to go, you can take like a little quiz on how much are you flourishing and, character strengths and different positive psychology tools that I have. And if anyone wants to just even chat with me, they're more than welcome. You can book a call and I'm happy to share more and see if there's a way that I can help individually, or I also work with organizations too.
Love it. Love it.
Yes.
Great. And of course, you can visit my website at gialacqua.com, reach out on Instagram at gialacqua, on my homepage or on the website. You can download your complimentary copy of From Chaos to Clarity, a 30-day journal for self-discovery and healing. This is Gia signing off with gratitude for your time and energy. Our mic drops, but the movement continues. Until next time, your next chapter is waiting. Take care.
That concludes another empowering episode of Your Future Starts Now. Before we wrap up, I want to thank this incredible community of high-achieving women. Your energy, resilience, and commitment to growth are the driving force behind what we do. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate it, leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Your feedback fuels our mission to empower high-achieving women just like you. And of course, share Your Future Starts Now with the extraordinary women in your life who are also on a journey of healing and empowerment. Connect with us on social media, share your thoughts, let us know what topics you'd like to explore in future episodes. Stay connected on Instagram at gialacqua. I encourage you to carry the energy of this conversation into your day and keep on supporting the incredible women around you. Until next time, remember, your next chapter is waiting.